Let's talk about American support for Israel. You say Israel is alone, but certainly that isolation is not complete.
The target of Iran is clear. The target is Israel. Destruction of Israel. Not to be able to understand that. Not to be able to say that clearly, that Israel has the right and the duty to win against Iran, whatever it means. It means that the support is just a half support.
Hello, and welcome to Think Twice. This week we have an important conversation about the October 7th anniversary for you with French philosopher, filmmaker, and journalist Bernard-Henri Lévy. One programming note, we'll be off the next 2 weeks for Sukkot. But before we start today's program, I want to remind you, as always, to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. Also, you still don't have to wait a full week for more of our content. There is a Jonathan Tobin daily podcast where I have sharing more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Jonathan Tobin Daily on the JNS channel and wherever you get your podcasts. And now to today's program. The first anniversary of the worst mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust was commemorated in cities around the world, as well as on many American college campuses, with rallies that were labeled pro-Palestinian, but which were really celebrations of the crimes of Hamas that were committed on October 7th. Israelis are, for the most part, too focused on the ongoing wars on Hamas and now on Hezbollah, as well as on the threats of missile attacks from the terrorists in Lebanon, as well as from their paymasters in Iran. As a result, they are not likely to be spending too much time worrying about what Western intellectuals and students are thinking about their battle for survival. But for American Jews, this has been one more revelation that indicates just how deep the hostility to Israel and the Jewish people runs. That so many Americans believe that they are supporting a righteous cause when they chant for the destruction of Israel is shocking, but hardly surprising. A generation that was indoctrinated in woke doctrines that brand Israel and Jews white oppressors truly believes the people who were slaughtered on October 7th were settlers who had no right to be in their own homeland. It's not so much that they think Israel's policies are wrong or even that its military is insufficiently concerned with avoiding civilian casualties. They believe that everything that Israel does is wrong because they don't believe it should exist. And they believe that everything that its opponents do is justified, no matter how barbaric or atrocious their actions, such as the crimes of October 7th. As a result, much like Holocaust deniers, they deny or minimize the murders, rapes, torture, and kidnapping by Palestinians, while also glorifying them as resistance. That they are denying Jews' rights that they would not think to deny to anyone else shows that their opposition to Zionism is indistinguishable from anti-Semitism. But those cheering for Israel's destruction are indifferent to their embrace of the world's oldest hatred or believe that their support for the lie about Israel being a racist apartheid state absolves them of their animus for Jews. This is also reflected on the world stage, where, aside from the often half-hearted support given to Israel by the Biden-Harris administration, the Jewish state is largely isolated and subjected not merely to lawfare campaigns by Hamas's allies like South Africa, but also to threats of arms cutoffs by supposed friends like France. How then should Jews and Israelis make sense of this depressing situation? For the most part, Israelis seem determined to fight on to defeat, as they must, their Hamas and Hezbollah enemies, as well as to hold Iran accountable for its part in October 7th, and the seven-front war against them that ensued. But diaspora Jews, especially those in the United States who labored under the delusion that anti-Semitism could not take root on these shores, must understand that there can be no truce or compromise with the woke ideology that has fueled the surge in anti-Semitism that has targeted their children as well as themselves. But one thing is clear. No matter where they live, Jews know that their world changed forever on October 7th, and any attempt to deny that or to pretend that the delusions about peace with the Palestinians that have long transfixed us must be consigned to the dust heap of history. One important writer that has also struggled with these dilemmas is Bernard-Henri Lévy. Long seen as one of the most foremost intellectuals of Europe, he has covered Israel for 50 years and been a strong peace advocate. But October 7th changed him too, and his new book is his first that is solely devoted to the dilemmas facing the Jewish state. And we're fortunate to have him with us today to discuss it. Bernard-Henri Lévy is a French philosopher and journalist, and director of 8 films on topics such as the war in Bosnia, Libya, Iraqi Kurdistan, besieged by ISIS, and the wars in Afghanistan, Somalia, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and Ukraine. He's the author of 48 books. Among the most recent are The Will to See, Dispatches from a World of Misery and Hope, The Virus in the Age of Madness, Empire and the Five Kings, The Genius of Judaism, American Vertigo, Traveling America in the Footsteps of Tocqueville, and Who Killed Daniel Pearl, and his newest effort, Israel Alone, about October 7th and its aftermath. Bernard-Henri Lévy, welcome to Think Twice.
Thank you. Happy to be.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I want to start by asking you about your own experience of October 7th, where you were and how it led to the writing of this new book, Israel Alone.
I was in Paris. I jumped in the first possible and available plane, which was the day after, October 8th. I landed in Tel Aviv. I rushed to Sderot, city of the south, immediately, where there was still some terrorists present and some fights. I went to the kibbutzim of Be'eri and Faza as soon as I could, which was on October 11, and the book started really there. I promised to myself, I promised to the survivors, I promised to the witnesses who spoke to me, I promised to the families of the hostages that I will remember, that I will do all that I can for my country of heart, which is America, remember with me what did just happen, and understand what it meant. So really the book stemmed out of this very early experience.
In your book, you write of Hamas embodying, and you use the word, the spirit of Amalek, which you identify as the same radical evil that animated every one of those who have sought the annihilation of the Jews since the time of Haman to that of Hitler. That sort of blunt talk about Israel's enemies, who you write put Israel and diaspora Jews in the same position, perhaps for the first time, is not what we're accustomed to in terms of commentary about the conflict, especially, with those who identify as liberal or being on the left. Why is it necessary for us to use this sort of language to articulate the nature of the war that is being waged on Israel?
I don't know if it is necessary, but for me it is natural. I am impregnated by philosophical culture, French culture, literature and so on, but also impregnated by biblical literature, biblical studies, Talmud, commentaries, old masters. This is part of myself. And for me, when I hear Hitler, when I hear Hamas, when I see Hezbollah, when I read their program, when I listen to the last statement of Khamenei, the leader of Iran, it's Amalek who comes to my lips. For me, it's, I don't know if it is necessary, but it is the same old story of which lasts since Amalek till today, of the story of the will of eradication, of annihilation, of genocide against the Jews. And for me, it is the same.
Well, I think that's very true. But of course, many of those who have almost from, the first days after October 7th have advocated for ceasefires, first with Hamas and now with Hezbollah and Iran, claim they only want to save lives and basically claim that discussions about the evil intent of those who are opposing Israel is irrelevant. Why do you think it is so hard for them to accept that their desired policy merely rewards evil and terror and makes more suffering inevitable? Why is that so hard for people to accept?
Because there is two options, two possible explanations. One is that they are just evil. They just hide their real game, and they share some of the wills, of the desires of those of whom we are speaking now. It can happen. And there is another explanation that they just don't understand. They just are ignorant. They just don't read and listen. On October 7, October 8, October 9, what happened? Of course, the biggest pogrom, the biggest killing of massacre of Jews since World War II, but also the intention to resume, to restart, to do it again. This is what Hamas said. This is what Hezbollah implied when it started a new war, opened a new front on the very 8th of October. The idea was that it was just a beginning. October 7 was just a beginning. It was an invasion of Israel, and the project, the intention was to go much further and to do it again. So if people don't want to hear, it's sad. But you are here. I try to be here in order to help them to open the ears.
Yeah. Now you see the war, as you write in your new book, the war on Israel in the context of centuries of anti-Semitism, and you cite the arguments for Israel as insurance that the Holocaust and the many other attacks on the Jews could not happen again. But it would appear that much of the world no longer accepts that argument, indeed arguing that the Jews are uniquely not entitled to a homeland. That kind of relentless haste is something that many Jews have trouble accepting, believing that this is our fate, as much as it seems like that's the narrative of Jewish history. Do you think that October 7th sobered most Jews up about this, or do you think people are still clinging to whatever illusions they had before that?
I think that October 7 was for the Jews, you ask me. Yeah.
Yes.
No, for the Jews, I think it was a shock. Each of them. Even those who are far from Israel, who are not Zionists. I think that October 7 was a deep, loud, profound shock for all of them. There is a sense, I know Jews who are hostile to Israel. I know that. We have a lot in France. You have a lot in America. You have the worst, like Noam Chomsky or others. We have the same sort. I suspect that even for these sorts of people, this was a wake-up call. That Amalek was back, that the destruction was possible, that the hate was immense, was limitless. it was a wake-up call for all of them. Even if they don't say, of course they don't say, they say the reverse.
Yeah, I think one of the most moving and interesting passages for me in your book was when you wrote about your conversation with filmmaker Claude Lanzmann, known for his works on the Holocaust. And when he spoke of his, disbelief when he first heard that Israel's opponents were calling it a colonial enterprise. This is decades ago, and where he said, so they're basically invalidating, the Exodus. But the fact that a growing number of Americans, I can't speak for what happens in Europe, but I know as far as Americans are concerned, primarily on the left, it's unsurprising to those of us who understand that a generation that had been educated, really indoctrinated by doctrines like critical race theory and intersectionality, which identify Israel and Jews as white oppressors, who are by definition always in the wrong, right, and the Palestinians is always in the right, no matter how evil their deeds. How much do you see this acceptance of anti-Semitic tropes by those who believe they are supporting a righteous cause as a growing threat to Israel and Jews?
It's growing. It's growing on your campuses. It's growing on ours. And it is the world completely reversed, of course. And this would have made my dear friend Claude Lanzmann mad. Because what is the reality about this affair of Israel being a colonial state? I take the point seriously in the book. I reply to those people. I try to reply to these students in Harvard, in Michigan, University of Michigan, and so on. Colonial country means invasion of indigenous country by foreigners. Jews have always been indigenous in this place of the world. There have always been Jews there. And when the UN plan of partition was declared, in what was to become Israel, there were already half of Jews, half of the population of the territory which was to be named Israel few months after, half were Jews. So they cannot say, our dear students, that Jews came from abroad to conquer a foreign territory as we did in Algeria, for example. Number one, those who came in the 30s, there were some who came from Germany, for example, who came. They did not come like the vanguard of an empire. They came as the bean of the empire, of the people which the empire, which was Germany at this time, did not want. They came as refugees, not as conquistadores, They
were not colonials settling it for Germany. They were fleeing Germany.
They were rejected.
Yeah.
They arrived there because they had no other place to go. They were the most deep, rejected, miserable, reckless people in the world. These are the people who joined Palestine in the 30s. And number three, when Israel finally took birth, when Israel, between the plan of partition of 47, this is what I try to explain to students, and the declaration of independence by Ben-Gurion. What happened? A war. A war against whom? Against whom? Against the empire of that time, which was, I'm sorry, UK, England. England was a colonial force in Palestine. And the Jews who created the state of Israel were an anti-colonial force, anti-imperialist force. The birth of Israel is the pattern, the model, the best achieved war of anti-colonial liberation. This is what I try to make clear to when I meet students in a campus in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and I will in the coming weeks. I will have some additional meetings of that sort. This is what I try. You know that, of course, and your people who follow you, I know that, but it is what we have, let's say, that we have to plead, to explain, to make clear to those progressists who believe that this fantasy of Israel being a colonial, there is few countries less colonial than the Zionist Israel.
Yeah, but the problem, and you're someone who has spent your life in the world of ideas, as a philosophy. What is more powerful than an idea, especially a very simple one, which, argues that Jews are by definition, white settlers, white oppressors, the Palestinians, the people of color, because they transfer the struggle for civil rights to the Middle East, which we have seen with the recent book with Ta-Nehisi Coates. That this idea has conquered the American Academy. I mean, we're speaking the day after October 7th, the October 7th anniversary. We saw marches on all of these campuses, throughout the country. My alma mater, Columbia, very prominently among them, of people, young people, supposedly among the most educated in this country, in theory, the most educated, spouting, this very ignorant thesis. But that's what they've been taught. That's what they believe. That's what their professors are teaching them.
That's why
and that's our problem, isn't it?
That's why I wrote this book. I think I am at least as much entitled as their professors, their teachers, to say what is an oppressor, what is a colonial state, what is an anti-colonial fight. I know that by heart. I spent all my life defending human rights, fighting against empires, and so on, all my life. Okay? So, in this book, I try to prove, and number one. And number two, I know Israel. Those those teachers who at Cornell University said that October 7 was the best day of their life, they are, first of all, horrible people, criminals in ideas. But number one, they are ignorant. They should just go in Tel Aviv. They should see, they would see that the most multi-ethnical country which they can find, except America, maybe, is Israel. You have whites, you have blacks coming from Ethiopia. You have, I don't even want to enter in these categories, but the most multi-ethnical, multicultural, an example of multi-ethnicity which I know is Israel. And look, I honestly, with my friend Claude Lanzmann, we spoke so often of the secular miracle of 1948. The secular miracle, which was what? People coming from Europe, from Arabic countries, from Russia, from America, from all parts of the world. People who had an experience of liberty, people who had no experience of liberty, who came from totalitarian regimes, people speaking all different languages, people having all different ethnical roots. They joined and they made overnight, really overnight, what the philosopher of the Enlightenment called a social contract. And they made a country. And they made not only a country, it's not difficult to make a country, but they made a democracy overnight. I don't know any other example of so different people with so different backgrounds, speaking so different languages, with experience or not of freedom, gathering and overnight making a democracy. If you read the philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, like Thomas Hobbes, all these people, they say that this is a paradigm, of course, but impossible in reality. Israel proved it true in reality. So this is what these professors whom I quote in my book should themselves learn. They cannot teach because they don't know. Again, they are ignorant. So that's why I wrote this book. That's my job, to provide some tools, some arms, some weapons, ideological weapons, intellectual weapons, of course, to those who should distrust their bad teachers in the universities you were talking about.
Well, I certainly hope that succeeds.
Of course, it will not succeed, but it's a long struggle, step by step. You know, I am at the same time. At some moments of the day, I'm really, really dark. When I see brave French and American youngsters, teenagers, listening to those thugs, those crowds of criminals who shout from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, I'm dark, really, because from Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free means genocide of 8 million Jews and at least not to speak about the Arabs and the Druze and the Christians. But at other moments of the day, I don't know why, maybe because I'm a Jew, because I'm an enlightened Jew, because I'm a liberal Jew, I'm optimistic. And I believe in the strength of ideas. And I believe that when I go at Farid Zakaria with my show, with my broken English, my poor English, just before Mr. Coates, which you just quoted, I hope it has a certain effect. I hope that it puts it a little grain in the spirit of some people who will reflect after that. If not, Jonathan, what do? We are useless. Okay, I go and in the south of France, in the sun, to do literature. Okay, it's not the moment for me yet.
Well, that's well said. Now, the heart of your thesis is that Israel is alone and must sort of fight for victory alone against evil opponents, regardless of the obstacles. I want to start in sort of examining that by asking you about your own country, France, and what is going on there. The most recent, sort of headline about that was President Macron's threat to cut off arms to Israel. Not that Israel is really dependent on French arms to fight its wars. What is going on there? Is that about, when we speak about what's going on in terms of American pressure on Israel, that's often about American politics. Is that about French politics and sort of Macron's uneasy alliance with the left since the last election against Marine Le Pen and her surging party? Or is this a reflection of history? Because you're not shy about referencing Dreyfus and the whole history of anti-Semitism in France. What's going on there, really?
First of all, what's going on is that we have in France a long tradition, you are right, of anti-Semitism. We have been, and we still are, one of the most anti-Semite, one of the really anti-Semite countries in the Western world and in Europe. I even wrote a book 40 years ago called French Ideology, where I said that some of the paradigmas of the fascism and of the anti-Semitism of the 20th century were born in France at the time of the Dreyfus affair, especially on the left, by the way. The left in France is really poisoned, not all the left, there is two left, but is poisoned since the Dreyfus affair by the virus of anti-Semitism. Okay?
Now, can I just jump in and say that to those who are taught the history of France, maybe outside of France, the simple version is that, the anti-Dreyfusards, and the anti-Semitic forces were on the right, and it was the left and Zola.
No, they are wrong. The anti-Semite We are on the right and on
the
left. And you had a very strong leader of the Socialist Party. It was before the birth of the Communist Party. His name was Jules Guesde, Guesde, who was a furious anti-Semite. It was a hater of the Jews, and really it is difficult to make. There is a discussion among historians to say what was the balance, but it was probably close to half of the Socialist Party, maybe lower, maybe higher, but close to it. So this is the story of my country. This is the story of the left of my country. So what we are seeing today in France is the revival of this old left of the Dreyfus affair. And you had already some revivals in 1940, for example, when France capitulated against Hitler, when Marshal Pétain created a government of collaboration. You had some people coming from the left who endorsed Marshal Pétain, who gave him full powers, and who came in the government with him. So this is an old story. After that, we have in France, since General de Gaulle, we have something which we call the Arab policy of France, and which has a very bad influence on Quai d'Orsay, on our State Department. Our State Department has really a problem with Israel and with the area since long. So what happened with President Macron? I don't know. What I can tell you is that what happens in my mind, I'm very sad. I'm very sad of the last statements of President Macron, because I voted for him twice. I supported him a lot. He took a brave position on another topic, which is, for me, important for the state of the world, which is Ukraine. And I really don't understand why he made this bad, immoral, and absurd statement. Because on top of every cherry on the cake, we don't sell weapons. France doesn't sell weapons to Israel, so it is absurd. On top of
yeah, right. France used to be a main source of weapons to Israel in the 1950s, but that's
General de Gaulle already, during the war of 1967, when he had this famous sentence, the Jewish people, peuple sûr de lui, peuple d'élite sûr de lui et dominateur, sure of himself and dominating imperialism, there was already an interruption on the weapons and a sort of blockade. Yes, that's the story of my country with Israel. I'm not proud of that. I'm not happy with that. I'm not comfortable with that. But beware of what is happening in America.
Yeah, that's my next question. So let's talk about American support for Israel. Now, you know, as you say Israel is alone, but certainly that isolation is not complete. Even if America's support under the Biden-Harris administration has been half-hearted, they've talked out of both sides of their mouths, and sometimes is dedicated to obstruction of the war as its successful end. But I guess I might argue, sort of to push back on your thesis, is that the way Democratic presidential candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris, has been forced to constantly reiterate her support, at least in principle, if not in practice, for Israel, while not alienating her party's anti-Israel left wing, a reflection of the fact that the vast majority of Americans still do back Israel, and she fears alienating them.
Dear Jonathan, when a country, such a small country as Israel is, we should never forget that Israel is very, as Ariel Sharon once told me, that this is in the book, Ariel Sharon, whom I met a little time before his stroke, he told me, Gaza is bigger than everyone thinks, Gaza is 10 times a Dubai city, but Israel is smaller than everyone thinks. So when such a small country faces an existential threat, this is the case of Israel. It is not a regular war. It is an existential war. It is a total war against Israel. Total war means there are very few total wars in the history of the world. Very few. Total war means a war whose aim, whose target is the annihilation of the adversary. This is what General Ludendorff in 1935 in a famous essay called the total war. Okay, so when a country faces a total war, it does not need support by principle. As you said, the Democratic candidate provided. It needs full-hearted support, not only principle, full-hearted. And I heard that I have great deal of sympathy for Mrs. Harris. She's obviously a good leader, no doubt. But I heard very carefully, with great attention, to her debate with her competitor, Donald Trump. She said about the state of the world, she said two things. One good thing about Ukraine, which is also dear to my heart, as I told you before. About Ukraine, she said, Ukraine has the right to win, and we have to support Ukraine in her effort to win. I was happy. I applauded. I said, well done. And then about Israel, she said, Israel has the right to defend itself, has a right to self-defense. And I thought, wait a minute, right to self-defense, every country in the world has this right. This is in the chart of the United Nations. Even the worst country, the most, has this right. Why does she not say that Israel, in the same, has the right to win? Has the right to win. This would be a full support. And this is what I say, that Israel is alone, because the real, I hope I'm wrong, but the problem with Israel is not just to contain Hezbollah. It is not just to wait for Iran to get the nuclear weapon. I saw that the President Biden, and again, a decent man, he said he honestly he will leave a decent legacy, no doubt. But why does he requires from Israel not to strike the nuclear sites of Iran? This makes no sense. As my friend Tom Kaplan said yesterday in a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, if we let Iran arrive to the nuclear step, it's finished. The target of Iran is clear. They don't care about the second strike. They are really crazy. They are not chess players. The target is Israel, destruction of Israel. So, again, not to be able to understand that, not to be able to say that clearly, that Israel has the right and the duty to win against Iran, whatever it means. I don't know if it is to destroy this or that. I'm not a strategist, but it means that the support is just a half support, or maybe not even half.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right about that. Those are very telling critiques of both Biden and Harris. I do want to drill down on something you wrote in a passage in your book, in which you seem to sort of downplay or dismiss support from right-wing sources, specifically evangelicals. Now, I know you're someone who loves America. You speak of it as the home of your heart. You wrote a book sort of attempting to follow in the footsteps of de Tocqueville.
Not attempting, I did follow. I did.
Yeah, I know, yes.
I don't know if I did it well, but at least I followed the steps. That's true.
Yes, you did. And in it, you stated that American evangelicals seem to all support Israel because of belief that the Jews will convert once Jesus returns in the second coming. I mean, that seemed to be dismissing a broad, body of people who support Israel with a very quick stroke, very dismissively. First, I might point out, not all evangelicals believe that. Their beliefs are as diverse as, speaking as someone who spent a lot of time with them and talking with them myself, their beliefs are as diverse as that of Jews. And most actually, in my experience, don't hinge their support for the Jewish state on that doctrine. And they've been the engine of practical pro-Israel activism in this country for 2 decades and sort of demonstrated their devotion to it in many ways. But you seem to be willing to just sort of write them off pretty cavalierly. How do you justify that?
Dear Jonathan, when you are in such a disarray as Israel is, and as I am, as a supporter of Israel, of course, any alliance is welcome and even blessed. Okay? That's clear. Every alliance, every support, anyone who extends a brotherly hand is welcome. We have no possibility of choosing our allies. Now, if you want to have a philosophical or theological discussion with me, and also a discussion about our experience of the neo-evangelical, we can have it. I have an experience of the neo-evangelical also. When I wrote my book on the footsteps of Tocqueville, American Vertigo, I went to some of those mega churches and so on. And my feeling, but maybe you know better, is that the most serious of them, those who really think, reflect, have a theological point of view, read really the books, the Torah, les évangiles, and so on, there is this idea of, which I describe in my book, of the Jews standing, keeping the place till the end of the days when Christ will revive and so on. You cannot prevent that. As I don't believe in the last days, I believe in messianism. I believe in Jewish messianism, and Jewish messianism has one singularity. Someone who believes in Jewish messianism believes that the Messiah will arrive the day after his arrival, which is a very famous saying of our master. So there will not be a date. That's what I mean. So I let them believe, those serious neo-evangelical, I let them believe what they want. I think, I know that the day will not come.
Well, I think that's the argument that people who sort of embrace the evangelical say, like, even if it were true that every single one of them believed that and hinged their support for Israel on that, which I don't believe is really true, but even if it were, there isn't a Jew from right to left, liturgically or politically, who believes that Jesus is coming back. So why should we care what they are going to do or what their expectations are for when that event that we don't believe is happening is going to, it happens. It just seems to be, kind of nothing that we should really worry about.
Why should we care? Because
my point.
I like, maybe because I try to be consistent. When I have friends, I'm happy to know if they are friends for good or bad reasons. If they really like me, or if they like someone whom they believe I am. I like to know if their love of me, I mean, of what I can represent, is based on a misunderstanding or on a true and real knowledge. You have a lot of Christians. For example, the Catholics. The Catholics, I think, since Vatican II, since the encyclic Nostra Aetatum, they made a real revolution. I think they like the Jews for good reasons. They know the Jews. They made the effort. They really read the texts. They stop believing, for example, this point is very important. They stop believing that we are their dads, their fathers. This is what the old Christianity believed. Jews are the fathers, Christians are the children. As you know the mechanism, this is life. One day the father disappears and the children inherit. Vatican II, the Catholics, said no. We finish with that story of father and son. We are brothers. This is the revolution of Vatican II, which is one of the biggest revolutions of the 20th century, much more important than any revolution of the century. Vatican II, brothers, which means real fraternity, real common knowledge, and so on. So this I'm happy to know, and true also for Protestant, for Reform, les Protestants. Now you have some neo-evangelical who like us for reasons which are not based on this true, deep knowledge and understanding. That's what I mean.
No, I understand that, and I think what you say about Catholics and liberal Protestants sort of liking Jews for the right reasons. I understand that argument. Of course, those, especially liberal Protestants, and to some extent Catholics, they have been, heavily infiltrated by the hard left and the arguments that we've already gone through about Israel. So they're not really good friends either.
No, we're not.
In fact, they are among our worst enemies.
Now you had Vatican II was
it's a long time
ago. It was a great revolution. Now we have a counter-revolution, which is incarnated by this alleged left, who are in reality often the worst of the fascists, and who re-inject the poison of anti-Semitism in the Christianity. Yes, I know that. This is a counter-revolution. If Vatican II is a revolution, as I believe, those Christian leftists with guillemets, with comma, embody a counter-revolution in my words.
Another point that you bring up repeatedly in the book is your long support for a two-state solution, Israeli territorial withdrawals, and the dismantling of Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. You also very explicitly say that the aftermath of October 7th is not the time for such advocacy. But I guess my question about that is that didn't Sharon's experiment in Gaza, which led directly to it, October 7th, I might argue, about which you said, you spoke and you write in your book about the tears of joy that you wept after you spoke to Sharon and, sort of realized what his intent was. But doesn't, the events of a year ago and everything since show that scheme won't work because the Palestinians are no more interested in it now than they were at any point in the past several decades. One might even argue that what the Palestinians had in Gaza under Hamas was an independent state in all but name. Unless it is a religious doctrine rather than a public policy proposal, isn't it time to sort of accept that until there is a sea change in Palestinian political culture, which is nowhere in sight and may merely be a Jewish utopian dream, that isn't, a two-state solution just isn't viable now or at any point in the foreseeable future.
Jonathan, I always said all my life, number one, that I always said that the two-state solution is possible only, of course, if it is not a country governed by haters of Israel and who will start the day after. That's sure. The condition for a two-state solution is to have a Palestinian leadership and a Palestinian people who, in the depth of their heart and not only in the brain, accept the presence of Israel and are really decided to make peace. This is sure. Maybe I made, after Sharon left Gaza, maybe I made a mistake of appreciation. Maybe I did not guess enough. But who did it? That Gaza could stem out of that. Okay. But it's not only that Hamas has to be beaten. Hamas, all those who did not condemn Hamas, and all those who are bred with anti-Semitism, hate, fantasy about return home and the key of the house in Tel Aviv, blah blah blah. All that has to be rejected by the Palestinians themselves. And what I say is that day, when this day comes, when the Palestinians understand that Israel is there forever, and that is not a calamity for them, but it can be good if they want, then we have to have a two-state solution. And the second thing which I believe is that day is not remote like the comeback or like the arrival of the Messiah. It can come soon. We saw in history some U-turns of that sort. Germany, after 1945, honestly, in 1943, 42, 90% of Germany was Nazi. 1945, when Hitler was beaten, but really beaten, not by compromise, not by negotiation.
Not by a ceasefire.
Capitulation. He disappeared from the surface of the world, him and his accomplices. Then, all of a sudden, Germany woke up like Germany. If you look at the history of Germany, they behaved as sleepwalkers who wake up at a moment of the night and who suddenly realize that they have been they have lived a self-nurtured nightmare. This can happen to the Palestinian people if the forces like Hamas, not only Hamas, are really beaten. But really beaten, I mean capitulate, are humiliated, don't have any possibility to take credit for any piece of victory. Then, you know, the peoples of the earth, they don't always like to be losers. You know, sometimes a people open the eyes and say, come on, since 80 years, we were misled. We had bad shepherds. They sold us this stupid idea that we will come back to Haifa and to Tel Aviv and to recover our house with the key we have on the chimney. Are we crazy? This can happen. We saw that sort of events already. I gave you an example of Germany.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. But so long as world opinion is encouraging them to hold on to those terrible fantasies,
you are right.
It can't happen.
It can happen.
Indeed, that seems to be Sinwar's strategy, that, eventually the West will bail him out, even, deep in the tunnel where he's hiding, surrounded by hostages.
You have the world opinion, and you have the strength of Israel. The moral strength, the spiritual strength, and the military strength. If Israel finishes to beat Hamas. It is nearly done. Beats Hezbollah. I'm not happy to say that because it will cost a lot of young Israeli lives, because it will create a lot of misery in Israel. Not to speak also of course, of the Lebanon lives, civil lives, and Gaza civil lives. But if you have the strength of Israel, and Israel can win, and will win, and has to win, and in history, with a big H, this is a very important point. President of France or Germany can say whatever he wants. If tomorrow Hezbollah capitulates, if tomorrow Iran understands that Israel is serious about its capacity and the beginning of destroying its nuclear capacity, the people will change. The world will change.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, as we say. My final question is about your long-term vision for Israel, which is, and as you write, it's one in which you hope that Israelis rise above the hatred of their neighbors, as well as you're very specifically about rejecting the political and religious right, and you make no secret of your animus for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But that leads me to ask two questions. First, how does Israel sort of rise above the cultural conflicts without being a prescription for renewal of what has become a culture of war between right and left in Israel? And second, for all of his shortcomings, which I certainly would acknowledge, as well as the fact that October 7th happened on his watch, can you envision any of Netanyahu's rivals being strong or determined enough to withstand the pressure from the United States, as well as the rest of the world, to continue fighting the war that they wanted finished several months ago?
Number one, first of all, the division of Israel, I don't see it as deep as you seem to, if I got your question well, I don't see it as deep as you say. Of course, there is division. Of course, there are political quarrels, but this, at the end of the day, is the essence of democracy. Democracy is vibrant if you have these sort of quarrels. But in front, I was in Israel recently, in front of Hezbollah, in front of Iranian threat, except a few marginal ignorance, and you have also some ignorance in Israel, everyone agrees more or less. This is my feeling, my recent feeling.
Certainly on those issues, you're absolutely right.
Even among, a few months ago, in the middle of the war against Hamas, I had the chance the privilege to be received by all the possible competitors, by Netanyahu himself, by the way, and by his competitors, all of them. I don't want to quote names, but you can imagine. We had great meetings, and some of them are really great Israelis, great Jews, and deserve to be tomorrow to office. But on one point, there was no real difference with Netanyahu. I was very surprised on the conduct of the war, on the strategy and the tactic. When I asked to this or this, at the end of the conversation, what would you do in Gaza? Honestly, I was astonished. The difference was minor. One said I would have begun by Rafah. The other said I would have besieged Khan Younis. But it was really not strategical difference. So I would not be so dramatic about the division of Israel and the war between Jews and so on. I really think that in front of the real danger, in front of an existential war, everyone is on board. Number two, you say the religious right. It's true that I don't like Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir.
You're not alone in that,
okay.
sure.
But for me, they don't embody the religion. They are not speak. They don't speak in the name of the Torah. I really believe that they are. They don't deserve the title of religious right. Religious is something serious. To be faithful to the Bible is something great. To be a reader of Talmud is something which deserves praise. It's one of the greatest books I knew in my whole life of lovers of books. So I don't think that they deserve that. And number three, to resist leaders able to resist the pressure of the so-called allies who pretend to know better than Israel what is good for Israel. I think that Israel always invented that. Israel always invented leaders, or leaders always revealed themselves, always. I knew all of them, since Golda Meir, and even Ben Gurion, whom I met after his retirement in his kibbutz. I think I met all the prime ministers of Israel, and Rabin, and Begin, and Yitzhak Shamir. I met all of them. All of them had, I don't know where they found this resource, these workings to embody Israel, to act as great leaders, and to resist, when it was necessary, the pressure of good friends who are bad allies. Because this is a problem of Israel. Sometimes Israel has, I don't say we, I'm not Israeli, but Israel has good friends who prove to be bad allies. And this is what they need a great leadership for. And they will have, I trust.
Well, I like the optimism. And that's a very good way to put it. Israel has good good friends who need to be good allies. Bernard-Henri Lévy, thanks so much for joining us today. It was an honor having you on the show. We also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition. Whether you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any of the other podcast platforms, watching us live on Facebook or X, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. Remember, we'll be off the next 2 weeks for Sukkot. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.